Subscribe now. EU Debates.
After the Second World War, the Iron Curtain descended across Europe, dividing it into the democratic West and the communist East. This bloc division lasted until 1990s, until the fall of Berlin Wall, the collapse of Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, and the emergence of new sovereign and democratic states, Slovenia among them. So Europe has witnessed 30 years ago a great condensing of history, with the exception of the Western Balkans. It unfolded peacefully, promising a better future for our continent and the entire world. And today, 30 years later, particularly due to the war in Ukraine, it seems that a prospect of a new bloc division looms over Europe. It might once again split it into a democratic West and authoritarian East, with the border between them also marking the boundary of Russia's zone of interest and influence. Although it might be too early to talk about all its possible ramifications, there can be no doubt that any new division would be bad news for the Europe, and for the world. A new bloc division would imply a kind of recycling of history, resurrecting not only the issue of so-called hard security, but also the question of the fundamental values, including democracy. History has taught us that bloc division is not a solution, it is a problem. It brings along the state of fragile, constantly threatened peace, accompanied by an arms race, proxy wars, and agonizing efforts for a peaceful resolution. If it is true that the war in Ukraine and its consequences might lead to a new bloc division, we should be concerned about whom it will divide and what this implies for Europe and the international community. If President Putin's objective is to restore and consolidate a large sphere of influence for the Russian Federation, leaving no room for the countries in this zone to move closer to the EU and NATO, then the turmoil will last as long as it takes for Moscow to establish such a sphere. One way or another, Putin will demand of the countries along its border to make a decision. Or else, he might take the decision for them by sanctioning them, perhaps even by force. In my speech, I would like to focus on just one consequence of this possible new division: the question of where its border might run in the Western Balkans and why. This could be the next central question for peace and security in Europe. If it holds true that the newly emerging Russian sphere of interest, of influence, will leave no room for countries aspiring to join the EU and NATO, then this new geopolitical division might make the Western Balkans part of the Western world. This, however, depends mostly on the decision taken in Brussels as much as on those taken by countries of the Western Balkans. The longer the EU enlargement process, the more these countries are prone to Russia's aspiration, or at least to Russia's growing influence. This is why Slovenia has been working for years towards swift and decisive EU enlargement to the Western Balkans. This is, in our view, a central geopolitical issue. It is also possible that the new bloc division might run across the middle of the Western Balkans, and this is a cause for concern. I find it hard to imagine this could unfold without security risk. In this respect, Bosnia and Herzegovina seems to be of key importance. Slovenia is doing everything in its power to convince the EU and the West to fast-track the accession of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the EU and, if possible, to NATO. Should the conflicts in Bosnia and Herzegovina escalate, this might pose a serious security risk for the country, for the region, and for Europe. Now it is time to understand and resolve this problem. Since our dear guest here is also the President of the European Commission and our dear friend, Mrs. Von der Leyen, I would like to reiterate Slovenia's proposal that Bosnia and Herzegovina be granted candidate status this year and, if possible, without any condition whatsoever. For the purpose of this conference, and as a friend of Serbian President Vučić and the President of Serbia, allow me to make another remark in this context. In my opinion, Serbia will play a decisive role if it comes to the division of Europe in the Western Balkans. Here I am referring to Serbia's traditional security, political, economic, cultural, and emotional attachment to Russia. I would like Serbia's policy to help keep the whole of the Western Balkans on the Western European side. However, this is a complex issue, and I believe we must address it as such. The point is that Serbia would probably be willing to risk a break with Russia only if given firm, very firm assurance about its place in the European Union. But it's not completely sure about this. In my view, we must do everything in our power so that our action convince Serbia to strengthen its political will for European perspective. Getting Serbia on board with the Western European option would be in turn greatly contribute to resolving problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not to mention the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. In this context, we must insist on our three expectations. Number one, that Serbian official policy rejects the idea of so-called Serbian world, Srpski svet. Number two, that Serbia rejects separatist tendencies in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And number three, that Belgrade successfully concludes the dialogue with Pristina. Ladies and gentlemen, from what has been said, we can see that the European Union has a major role to play on issues related to the ramifications of the war in Ukraine and to the situation in the Western Balkans. In my opinion, the EU should make a much greater effort to draw the Western Balkans into its zone of influence and also its membership. I am aware that some are very concerned about the political costs of this course of events. But experience has taught us that the price of indecision can be much, much higher and much sadder. I believe that there is still time to act. However, consensus must be reached in Brussels as soon as possible that enlargement of the Western Balkans has become a key geopolitical issue. In hope that we will succeed in these endeavors, I thank you for your attention and wish you all successful work at the forum. Thank you for your attention.